Welcome to FolkFear, a place where forgotten rituals breathe, where ancestral whispers cling to the corners of your room, and where the soil remembers every sorrow buried in silence. Here, we do not just tell stories, we awaken them. Tonight, we invite you to follow a path worn by mourners long forgotten. In a village that sleeps behind the mountains and fog, the grieving wear wooden masks, not to hide their sorrow, but to let it grow, until it becomes something else entirely. This is a tale of masks that remember every tear, of spirits that do not rest, and of the face you wear when grief refuses to let go. Light a candle, close the door, and whatever you do not remove the mask before the 9th night. This is the Mourner's Mask, a haunting folk horror tale. The rain had stopped just before the final toll of the funeral bell. In the village of Namke, nestled in a deep fold between mist-draped mountains, the air always felt old, like breath passed down through generations. The mourners stood motionless under the gray sky, heads bowed, the incense smoke curling around their feet like fog, unsure of where to rest. And at the edge of the clearing, a young woman knelt beside a fresh mound of earth. Lien did not cry, not because she did not feel the grief, but because something in her had not yet caught up with it. Her mother, Mai, had always been the anchor in her world, not by force, but by presence. Now that presence was gone, it left a strange, weightless pain, like standing on a cracked bridge that hadn't yet collapsed. The villagers whispered as they departed, their eyes avoiding hers. Only one stayed behind, a man draped in heavy robes of dark brown, with fingers stained from years of wood shavings and lacquer. He carried a small bundle wrapped in black cloth. Baduong, the village's oldest mask carver. "You must wear it," he said softly, crouching beside her, "from tonight until the 9th night." Lien glanced at the bundle. She had heard the stories as a child about the mourning masks, the ones worn by those closest to the dead. It was an old custom, one practiced only in their isolated valley. Outsiders called it superstition, but here it was law passed down in whispers. Baduong unwrapped the cloth, revealing a mask carved from dark sandalwood. It bore her face, but not as it was now. This face was older, wearier, furrowed with sorrow she hadn't yet expressed. The eyes, though painted shut, seemed to tremble with an echo of pain. "It will help you carry your grief, so it doesn't find another way out," he said softly. Lien stared at it. Did you carve this?" Baduong's hand hovered over the mask. "I only release what's already there." She did not understand what he meant, but she took it. As she walked back toward her hut at the edge of the forest, the mask felt heavy in her hands, not in weight, but in intention. She had never worn one before. Her father had died when she was still too young to understand grief. Her mother had always been the one to carry the weight of ritual. Now that burden had passed to her. That night, as the first candle was lit and the 9th night vigil began, Lien sat cross-legged before her family altar. The mask rested in her lap, facing upward. It seemed to breathe with her. The air thickened, not from heat, but from presence, the kind of quiet that feels watched. She lifted the mask to her face. The wood was cool, but not cold. It settled over her skin with a strange familiarity, as if it knew where each curve of her bone lay. She tied the cords behind her head and felt a faint click of something locking, not physically, but spiritually. Darkness deepened. Though her eyes were open behind the eye slits, she saw nothing. The world became the sound of her breath, the hum of the candle flame, and the low sigh of wind outside. She didn't realize how much the mask muffled her senses until she heard a new sound, a whisper, low, drawn like thread. She turned her head sharply, but no one was there. The whisper came again, not in words, but in the shape of breath over breath, something her ears barely caught, but her bones felt. It echoed inside her ribcage like a voice remembered in a dream. Lien took a deep breath and steadied her hands. She would do this, for her mother, for tradition, for peace. 9 nights, that was the rule. The mask must be worn at dusk and not removed until dawn. Each night the mourner must sit before the altar, letting the sorrow bleed through the wood instead of through their soul. And never, under any circumstances, should the mask be removed before the 9th night. That was what she remembered hearing as a child. She stayed until the candle burned low, then finally lay on her side on the mat, the mask still on her face. Sleep came slowly, in waves, in fragments, and in the deepest part of the night, just before dreams take full hold, she heard her name, not spoken, exhaled. Lien. It was her mother's voice, muffled, like it came from behind the mask. Morning came, not with light, but with mist. When Lien removed the mask for the day, she felt a slight suction, as if it clung tighter than expected. Her cheeks were damp, but she had not cried. And the inside of the mask was wet, with tears that smelled faintly of sandalwood and rain. She stared into the wooden eyes. They no longer looked closed. In the faint light of morning, the carved lids seemed thinner, almost translucent. She placed the mask gently on the altar and backed away. The house creaked in the silence. Somewhere deep in the trees, a crow cried, long and low. The morning had begun, and the mask had started to remember. The mist had not lifted by morning. In Nam Kai, it never truly did. Lien stepped outside her hut, her breath forming clouds that joined the fog. The path to the village square was narrow and cold, lined with the roots of old banyan trees that had watched centuries of funerals. Each trunk had scars carved into its bark, patterns that looked like faces caught mid-weeping. Children said the trees absorbed the grief of the mourners. Adults pretended not to hear. In her hands, she carried the mask, wrapped again in the black mourning cloth. It felt heavier today, like something living had settled inside it overnight. The village was quiet, as it always was after a burial. Doors stayed shut, incense burned behind paper screens. Only the sound of the river murmuring through stones gave proof that time still moved. Lien followed that sound until she reached the small workshop behind the shrine, the home of Ba Duong, the mask carver. He was already awake, sitting cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by half-carved faces. Wooden eyes stared at her from every corner. Some smiled faintly, others frowned, and a few were neither, caught in the moment between breath and silence. Dust motes drifted through a shaft of light, making the air shimmer like the memory of smoke. Lien bowed. "Master Duong, I wore it last night, as you said." He didn't look up. His knife whispered against the wood, shaving off curls that fell like ash. "You removed it before dawn?" he asked. "No, I waited until the sun rose." "Good," he murmured. "Then your mother's sorrow still sleeps." Lien frowned. "What do you mean?" Ba Duang finally turned toward her. His face was as lined as the wood he carved, but his eyes were sharp, too alive for his age. "You think the mask is for the dead. It is not. It is for the living." She held up the bundle. "Then why must it look like me?" "Because sorrow knows your face," he replied. He motioned for her to sit. She did, the wooden floor cool beneath her palms. "There are two griefs," he continued, setting his knife aside, "the one we show and the one that hides. The mask catches the second one, the kind that festers in silence. When you wear it, that hidden grief has somewhere to go." "And if I take it off too soon?" Ba Duang's expression changed. His jaw tightened. "Then it will not return to silence," he whispered. "It will cling to the first thing it sees, a reflection, a shadow, sometimes another face." Lien felt her chest tighten. "That's just superstition." He gave a faint smile. "Everything begins as superstition until it happens to you." A gust of wind moved through the open doorway, rustling the hanging masks. The sound was like breath, dozens of quiet exhalations blending together. Lien looked around uneasily. Why do they all look different? Because they are not the same sorrow. He picked up one mask from the shelf, a man's face, the eyes hollowed out and the mouth slightly open, as if caught mid-prayer. "This one," he said softly, "was carved for a husband who could not weep when his wife died. He wore it every night, but on the 5th morning it had changed. The lips had closed. When I asked him if he had felt peace, he said yes. The next day, he was gone. Only the mask remained." Lien swallowed. "Then where did he go?" The old man shrugged. "Some say he walked into the forest and never returned. Some say he went to find the face the mask had taken from him." Her hands trembled slightly as she unwrapped her own mask. The old man's eyes softened when he saw it. He reached out carefully, his fingertips tracing the faint cracks that hadn't been there before. "It has already begun," he said. "What has?" He didn't answer. Instead, he set the mask beside a bowl of water. "Look," he whispered. The surface trembled. At first, it showed only her reflection, tired eyes, hair damp with mist. But as the water stilled, another face shimmered faintly beneath her own. Older, softer, familiar. Her mother. Lien gasped and pulled back. "That's not possible." "The wood remembers what it touches. Your tears, your breath, your mother's spirit, they are all part of it now. That is why you must complete the 9 nights. If you stop midway, she will not rest, and neither will you." He took a deep breath and returned to his carving, voice low, almost prayerful. "Do not fear the mask, child. Fear what it keeps away." Lien stood slowly. The walls seemed to close in, every carved face following her with its hollow eyes. She turned toward the door. But before she could step out, Ba Duang added, "When the 8th night comes, you will dream of the one you lost. She will ask you to remove it. Do not. That will not be your mother." The words followed her like a shadow. Outside, the fog had thickened. She could barely see the outline of her own house through the trees, but she felt it, that strange weight of being seen by something that was not human, not yet ghost, but waiting for a doorway. And the mask in her hands pulsed faintly, as if it had heard his warning too. That night, she lit the candle earlier. Its small flame looked fragile in the dark, like a heartbeat behind thin skin. She tied the cords once more, the wood pressing against her face. She thought of her mother, the way her hands used to smell of lemongrass and smoke. The lullabies hummed over boiling rice, the quiet, patient smile. But when she closed her eyes, she didn't see her mother's warmth. She saw the carved face, her own, in the dark. Hours passed. The candle died, and in the silence that followed, she heard faint knocking. Not from the door, from the inside of the mask. 3 soft taps. Then a whisper, warm against her ear, though no breath touched her skin. "I'm not gone yet, Lien." She tore the mask off, but the air itself resisted, stretching like wet cloth. When it came free, her breath escaped in a cry that barely reached her lips. The room was empty. Only the mask lay still in her lap, its carved eyes now open, gleaming with the faint light of dawn seeping through the shutters. And from somewhere deep within the wood, something sighed, content, alive. The next evening arrived without sunlight. The mist never broke that day. It hung heavy over Namkai like damp cloth, muting the sound of the world. No birds, no insects, no laughter from the market. Only the faint creak of wood and the low hum of wind moving between the houses. Lien hadn't eaten since morning. Her appetite had gone somewhere she could not follow. Every time she tried to lift food to her lips, she could still taste the sandalwood from the mask, a bitter sweetness that clung to her tongue. She avoided mirrors that day. The moment she had caught her reflection at the water basin, her stomach turned. She couldn't tell if the eyes that looked back belonged to her. They seemed deeper, watching, expectant. When dusk fell, she lit the incense at her mother's altar. The smoke rose in soft threads, curling in the candlelight like gray silk. It filled the small house with its thick perfume, sweet, heavy, almost suffocating. Lien knelt. The mask rested on the mat before her, its eyes now faintly open from whatever had happened the night before. She hesitated. She wanted to ask why. Why this mask? Why these rituals? But in Namkai, grief was not meant to be questioned. It was meant to be performed. She pressed her palms together and whispered the ancient chant her mother had taught her. The sorrow of one is the silence of all. The breath of the dead shall not be forgotten. The smoke thickened in reply, as if it had been waiting for those words. Lien lifted the mask to her face. It was colder tonight. The wood pressed against her skin like a second skull. Her breath warmed the hollow space inside, and she swore she felt it expand, like lungs remembering how to inhale. When she opened her eyes, the room looked different, dim, elongated. The shadows moved too slowly, as if underwater. The smoke from the incense no longer drifted upward. It hung mid-air, frozen in strange shapes. Lien blinked, and the shapes began to shift. At first they were only coils. Then faces began to form within them, faint outlines drawn in vapor, flickering with every tremor of the candle flame. She saw her mother's features for a heartbeat, then the faces of others, people she remembered from old funerals, neighbors, children, men whose names the village no longer spoke. Each face rose from the smoke like a sigh escaping flesh. Her pulse quickened. She tried to stand, but her knees wouldn't move. A soft sound filled the air, a murmur. Dozens of whispers folding over each other. She couldn't understand the words, yet they pressed against her ears like hands. "Do you see us? Do you remember? Do not look away." She tried to shut her eyes, but behind the mask, even that felt impossible. The carved lids did not close. She trembled. "Mother?" she whispered. "Is that you?" The smoke parted slightly, and her mother's face appeared again, more distinct this time, as if carved from the fog itself. But the eyes were wrong, too hollow, too deep. "I am still cold," the whisper apparition. "You buried me in wet soil." Lien's breath faltered. "That's not true. We followed the rites." "Not all of them. You forgot one." The faces began to overlap again, hundreds now, merging, rippling through one another like waves of the dead trying to climb out of memory. The incense sticks burned faster, crackling violently, their smoke twisting into a single spiraling column that reached the roof. Lien tried to rip off the mask, but it held firm. The cords had tightened around her skull. Her nails dug into the knots until her fingers bled, but they would not loosen. Then, a sound. A low, rhythmic knock coming from beneath the floorboards. Once, twice, 3 times. Each strike echoed through her ribs. The faces turned toward the sound. The entire room seemed to breathe. Lien's body moved without her will. Her hands touched the ground, palms flat, feeling for the heartbeat of the earth beneath her house. The knocks continued, not random now, but steady, calling. In the candlelight, she noticed something shifting under the floor. Dust lifted with each strike. Something was moving down there, something that remembered her voice. The whispers in the smoke grew urgent, pleading, commanding, blending into one endless hum that filled her skull. Then, silence. Utter, unbearable silence. Lien froze. She could hear her own pulse in her ears. The air grew colder, and behind the mask, something exhaled. It wasn't her breath. A soft, rasping sigh drifted past her lips, though she hadn't opened her mouth. The candle flickered, then went out. The darkness that followed was not natural. It had texture, a living density. In it, the smoke became visible again, faintly glowing with the light of dying embers. And in that glow, she saw them. Not reflections, not illusions, but faces, real and weeping, pressed against the inner surface of her mask, as though trapped inside it, clawing to escape. She screamed, but no sound came out. Her throat constricted, her chest convulsed, the air around her began to pulse like the beating of a heart. Then, just as suddenly, the candle reignited. The smoke was gone. The whispers stopped. Lien found herself kneeling exactly as before, mask still on, hands trembling, incense sticks burned to ash. It was over, or so she thought. When she finally managed to untie the cords and remove the mask, she gasped for air, as if surfacing from deep water. Her entire body ached. The wood left red marks on her skin. She turned the mask in her shaking hands. The inside was damp again. But this time it wasn't tears. It was ash, fine and black. She brushed her thumb across it, and beneath the soot, she found something carved in the inner cheek of the mask. A single word. Mai. Her mother's name. Lien stayed awake until dawn, staring at the mask on the altar. The candlelight cast her shadow across the wall, long, distorted, shifting as if another shadow stood behind it. She whispered into the darkness, her voice barely audible. "Mother, if you're still here, tell me what I forgot." No answer came, only the faint lingering smell of incense and the sound of the wind, soft, hollow, carrying through the cracks in the door like a sigh returning home.
It rained all morning. Not the gentle kind, but the kind that had weight, like the sky itself was grieving. Each drop hit the roof with the heaviness of unshed tears. The house creaked under it. The floor felt damp even without a leak. Lien sat alone by the altar. She hadn't lit incense yet. The mask lay on the mat beside her, untouched since last night. It had changed again. Where the eyes had once been painted shut, then slightly open, they now looked half-lidded, as if drowsy. And the mouth, once neutral, now curled downward slightly, as if holding back sorrow too long. But it was what rested just beneath the carved right eye that chilled her. A trail, faint, glossy, as if a tear had slid down the wood. Lien had touched it in the gray morning light. It wasn't water. The texture was strange, thicker than mist, more like oil. But it smelled of sandalwood, smoke, and something faintly bitter, like old sadness left too long in a sealed jar. She wanted to ask someone, but no one in the village would talk to her now. They avoided the home of a mourner on the 4th day, the most dangerous day in the old belief, when grief begins to move. By midday, she couldn't bear the silence. She wrapped herself in her mother's old shawl and stepped outside, hoping the rain had washed some of the heaviness away. It hadn't. Namkai was wrapped in stillness. The bamboo groves whispered things she couldn't hear, and the ground beneath her feet felt soft, almost swollen, like too much grief had soaked into the earth. She didn't know where she was going until she reached the grave, a small hill on the eastern edge of the village, where the dead were buried facing the rising sun. But today, there was no sun, only clouds hanging low, like old prayers too heavy to rise. Lien knelt at her mother's grave, pressing her hand into the damp soil. The wooden marker still stood. The incense bowl at its base was filled with water. The offerings had begun to rot. She felt ashamed. She hadn't returned since the burial. "I don't know if I'm doing this right," she whispered, "but I'm trying." The wind picked up. A soft gust, brushing her cheek like fingers that once braided her hair. She closed her eyes. When she opened them again, something glinted beneath the soil just beside the grave marker. She leaned in. A small piece of wood. She brushed away the mud, and what emerged sent a tremor through her bones. It was another mask. Not full, only the top half. A broken remnant, soaked through with age, but the carving was unmistakable. It was her face, or rather, her face if it had aged 10 years more. Lines of sorrow carved into the brow, hollowed eyes that had once been filled with color, now faded by weather. She picked it up slowly. Her fingers trembled. The back of the mask was blackened, as if it had been burned, but through the charring she saw a symbol etched deep into the wood, a spiral of 4 tears. She had seen that symbol once. In her childhood, when she'd peeked into Ba Duong's workshop and saw a mask he had buried beneath the floorboards. Why would a mask of her own face, aged, worn, broken, be buried here, at her mother's grave? Unless it wasn't hers. Unless someone else had worn it before. The thought struck her like cold water. Her mother. Could her mother have once been a mourner too? And if so, for whom? She rose slowly and stumbled back toward the village. That evening, the rain finally stopped, but the air remained damp. Her candle wouldn't stay lit. She tied the mask on, her mask, and sat before the altar in the dim orange glow of the fire pit. Tonight she did not speak the chants. She simply watched. The incense smoke climbed slower now. It didn't twist or writhe. It simply rose, steady, tired, like the breath of someone who had wept too long. And as the hours passed, she felt something change. Not around her, within her. The mask grew warm, then hot. Her cheeks flushed beneath it, her pulse quickened, but her body was cold. The sensation deepened, a pressure behind her eyes, as if someone had placed warm thumbs against her eyelids and slowly pushed inward. Her vision blurred, her ears filled with a low hum. Then, wetness. Her face grew damp beneath the mask. At first she thought it was sweat, but the scent was different. Salt, wood, smoke, sorrow. The same smell she had found beneath the tear track that morning. She reached up and pressed her fingers beneath the eye socket. They came away wet. The mask was weeping. She gasped, and the mask echoed the sound back at her. She could feel it now. The sorrow within the wood was no longer passive. It moved, it breathed, it cried. And as it cried, so did she. Not from fear, from something deeper. It was as though every memory she had tried to bury, every grief she had swallowed to appear strong, now rose in waves breaking against the shores of her heart. She remembered her mother's laugh, the sound of pots clattering in the kitchen, the warmth of hands wrapping rice in banana leaves, the way she had looked the morning she died, quiet, alone, unfinished. Lien wept until she collapsed forward, forehead pressed to the altar. She did not sleep, but she dreamed. And in the dream she saw a version of herself wearing the mask, standing over an open grave. The coffin was empty, and the soil bled. She woke with a start. The fire had died. The incense ash lay undisturbed. But the mask was no longer where she had placed it. It was sitting upright, facing her, its eyes wide open, and streaks of black now marked its cheeks, as if it had cried until it stained itself with its own sorrow. Lien did not scream. She simply stared, and the mask stared back. The 5th night began without warning. There was no twilight, only a sudden dimming of the air, as if the sky had blinked and forgotten to open again. The candlelight inside Lien's hut flickered with unease. Even the walls seemed to lean inward, warped by some quiet pressure gathering from beneath the floorboards. Lien hadn't touched the mask since the night it wept. It sat on the altar where she had left it, upright, watching. The streaks of dark resin that had dripped down its cheeks had not dried. They remained tacky to the touch, like sap leaking from a wounded tree. She had not spoken to Baduang again. She was afraid of what more he might reveal, afraid that if she kept asking questions, the answers would start answering back. But something had changed in her that morning, something that pulled her toward the grave again, not out of duty, out of instinct. The hill was drenched in wet fog. Grass clung to her feet as she climbed, each step sinking slightly deeper into the earth, as though the ground had softened its grip on the dead. Her mother's grave looked unchanged. But Lien wasn't looking at the surface anymore. She knelt again, brushing aside the damp offerings. Her fingers moved through the soil slowly, searching for what felt missing, not what was buried. And again, she found it. Another piece of wood. This time, it wasn't a mask. It was a shard, thin, curved, part of a larger carving, but not her, not this time. As she turned it over in her palm, she saw the remnant of a painted eye, distinctly almond-shaped, with a line of red trailing from its corner. A mourner's tear. The paint was worn, the color dulled by time and soil, but the craftsmanship was unmistakable. This had been someone's mourning mask long ago, and it had been buried here, at the same grave. But why? Lien's breath caught. Could it be? Her thoughts stammered in place. Had someone else mourned at this grave long before she had? She returned home with mud-streaked fingers and the shard of mask tucked inside her sleeve. That night, as the fifth candle burned low, Lien lit no incense. Instead, she laid the new mask piece beside her own, then sat quietly, trying to understand. There were things her mother had never spoken of, quiet habits, hidden glances, the way she sometimes touched her face in the mirror when she thought no one watched. And now she began to wonder, who had her mother mourned? The mask, the buried shard, the dark weeping wood, they all whispered the same truth. Something had not been finished. Some grief had nested deep in the bones of this family, and it had clung. She picked up her own mask. The moment her fingers touched it, warmth pulsed through her skin. It was ready, or waiting. As she tied the cords behind her head, the silence in the hut deepened. She could hear her heartbeat now, slow and muffled like footsteps on wet earth. The world behind the mask dimmed, but something else grew clearer. Lien sat still, her hands on her knees, and waited for the vision, for whatever had haunted her in smoke and wood, to rise again. But this time, there were no faces in the air. There was only a sound, digging, slow, rhythmic, the scratch of wood on earth. Then a whisper, low, raspy. "Why did you bury me here?" She turned her head, though inside the mask she couldn't tell if her body had moved or if the world had turned around her. In the shadows by the door, a figure stood, thin, drenched in mud, face veiled in a mask that had no features, only a single crack running from brow to jaw. It raised a hand, palm upward, and in its hand a seed, black, shining, pulsing. "You planted me where her sorrow grew. Now I bloom with yours." Lien's body stiffened. She could feel something moving in her chest, a weight shifting, like grief that had become physical, heavy, wet, and growing. She couldn't breathe. The figure stepped closer. It did not walk, it glided. Its bare feet left no mark, but where it passed, the floor wept moisture, as if its sorrow bled into the wood itself. Then another voice, this time behind her, warm, familiar. "Don't look at it, Lien." She turned, too fast, and there stood her mother, not as she remembered her in life, but younger, eyes wide with fear, hands shaking. "I tried to bury it, but it wouldn't stay buried." "Whose face is it?" "Not mine, not yours either." The wind outside began to howl. The candle died. Darkness swallowed everything. Then a burst of light, not from flame, but from the mask itself. Inside it she saw visions. A funeral long ago, a woman screaming, wearing a mask too tight against her face. Ba Duong, standing beside a grave, burying more than just a body. Her mother, younger, clutching a mask she never removed, and a child, barely walking, reaching toward her mother's veiled face, whispering, "Why are you wearing my sadness?" The visions ended. Lien gasped, her lungs burning. She tore the mask from her face. It came off easily this time, but her fingers were wet. Her lap was soaked. The mask had bled, black resin, warm, weeping from its eyes, from its mouth. And from behind her, a single knock on the wooden wall. Then silence. She turned. No one was there. But the shard of mask she had found earlier was gone. Only a small circle of ash remained where it had lain. That night she did not sleep. She placed the mask back on the altar, this time facing away. But even with its back turned, she felt its eyes watching. Not hers, not her mother's. Someone entirely else. On the 6th night, the mirror stopped working. It was a small thing, the old bronze mirror that had hung in the corner of Lien's hut since she was a child. A family heirloom, polished with ash and lemon oil, its surface warped slightly, but always true. Her mother used to comb her hair in front of it at dusk, humming under her breath. Tonight, when Lien passed it on her way to the altar, she paused. The candle in her hand flickered once, twice, and then stilled. She looked into the mirror, but the mirror did not look back. There was no reflection, no flame, no face, only a sheet of dull, black silence. Her breath caught. She raised the candle closer. Still nothing. The glass had not broken. The surface was intact, but it refused to show her, as if the room she stood in was no longer part of the world it once knew. She backed away slowly. The silence in the hut deepened. Something had changed. The mask sat on the altar, untouched since the night it bled. Lien hadn't wiped it clean. The dark resin had dried now into streaks, thin and brittle as veins beneath skin. The mouth had twisted slightly more downward, and the eyes now held a look of something close to recognition, as if it had finally remembered who it was meant to mourn. She did not want to wear the mask tonight, but the ritual demanded it. She had come too far to break the chain now. So, with trembling fingers, she lifted the mask to her face once again, the cords tied tighter than before, like hands pulling her back into something she no longer controlled. The moment the mask settled over her skin, the room became thinner. She could feel it, as though the walls were no longer made of wood, but memory.
The floor pulsed like muscle. The air was humid with breath that wasn't hers. Then the candlelight changed. Its glow no longer danced, it held steady, casting no shadows. Everything was too still, too perfect. And that's when she noticed. The mask was breathing. Not in motion, but in rhythm. It inhaled as she exhaled. It sighed as she paused. A strange inversion, like her grief had been rewound and replayed. She tried to stand. The room swayed around her like water in a bowl. She crawled to the mirror. And there, finally, she saw something. Not her, not even a woman, but a figure in white standing behind the mirror's glass, unmoving, masked. Its face was blank, carved with no features, only a crack, the same one she had seen in the shard buried near her mother's grave. The figure tilted its head as if studying her. She touched the mirror. The figure did not move. She whispered, "Who are you?" And for a moment, her reflection returned. Not her whole face, just her eyes. But they were not her eyes. They were deeper, older, worn with grief she had never lived. "You are wearing my face," the mirror whispered. "No," she murmured. "This is my mourning, my sorrow." "Then why do I remember it?" The voice was neither male nor female. It was gray, made of smoke and sleep. The mirror rippled, like water trembling beneath wind. Then the reflection vanished again, and Lien was left staring at herself, not in the mirror, but in the mask. She turned slowly, scanning the room. Everything looked the same, yet wrong. The wooden beams sagged in unfamiliar places. The table had an extra leg. The altar candles were arranged differently, 4 instead of 3. And the photo of her mother, framed in black cloth, was missing. She rushed to the altar. Gone. Only the mask remained. And beside it, carved directly into the wood of the altar, a name. Shuan. She didn't know the name. She had never heard it spoken in her family. She stumbled back, heart pounding. The candle flickered again. Behind her, the mirror began to crack. Not shatter, crack. A thin, jagged line splitting it from corner to corner. From that fissure, a dark fog began to leak, curling along the edges, reaching like fingers made of sleep. Lien tore off the mask. This time, it screamed, not out loud, inside her skull. A long, low cry, like a voice that had waited years to be heard, only to be silenced again. The moment the cords came loose, the fog vanished, the mirror cleared, the room returned to itself. But Lien remained changed. She crawled to the altar, clutching the mask to her chest, whispering over and over, "Who is Shuan? Why does your sorrow wear my face?" No one answered. Only the wind outside the hut, cold and sharp, like a blade dragged across bone. She turned back to the mirror. Her reflection had returned, but it no longer mimicked her perfectly. There was a delay. She blinked. It blinked after. She moved her hand. It hesitated, then followed. It wore her face, but it no longer belonged to her. The 7th night came too soon. The days had begun to blur, time folding in on itself like damp fabric. The village no longer felt real to Lien. People passed by her door, but their faces blurred,
their footsteps hushed like echoes from another world. No one looked at her. No one dared. Her home smelled of damp incense and scorched wood. The mirror remained cracked. She had covered it with cloth. And the mask. The mask no longer waited on the altar. It waited by her bed. Each morning she awoke to find it closer, a few inches more, as though it had moved while she slept, watching, listening. She told herself she must have done it, moved it without realizing. But some part of her knew better. She had stopped calling it the mask. In her mind, she had begun calling it her, because it no longer felt like an object. It felt like someone. That evening, Lien could not bring herself to light incense. Instead, she sat in silence, holding the mask in her lap. The wood was warmer than usual, as if it had been resting near a fire. Its surface no longer smelled of sandalwood. It smelled human, of sweat, of breath, of memory. She turned it over, tracing the cracks, the grain. She knew every line now, every carved sorrow. The mouth had changed again. It was open slightly, as if about to speak. The eyes no longer looked painted. They shimmered in the light like lacquered skin. Something was growing inside it. She could feel it, and something inside her was answering. She tied it on. The seventh knot was tighter than the rest. It bit into her scalp, as if the mask wanted to root itself deeper. This time, there was no shift, no smoke, no visions, no mirror, just silence. A long, endless stillness, thick as fog and heavy as grief. Lien sat unmoving for what felt like hours, and then her hands moved. Not by her will. They lifted from her lap, trembling, and reached upward, not to remove the mask, but to press it tighter. Her breath caught. She tried to stop, tried to resist, but her arms no longer listened. They moved like they belonged to someone else. She rose. The air around her felt thin. Her legs ached, but her steps were sure. She walked to the water basin near the back of the hut. Steam curled gently above it, though she had not boiled water tonight. She leaned in, and what she saw made her stagger back. Her reflection was not her. It was older. Her skin sagged, her eyes hollowed, her mouth downturned in permanent grief. She looked like her mother did just before death. No, worse. She looked like someone who had mourned too long, someone who had forgotten how to stop. The mask had aged her. No, rewritten her. Her hands rose to the cords, trying to untie them, but they wouldn't budge. They had sunken into her hair, into her scalp. She could feel the roots pulling, the skin stretching. Her breath quickened. She stumbled to her bed and clawed for the small bronze knife she kept beneath it, a keepsake from her mother. She raised it to the side of her head and began to saw at the cords. Each cut was pain, but the cords bled. Not her scalp, the cords themselves. Thin trails of dark sap ran down her neck. It smelled of earth and rot. When the last knot broke, the mask slipped forward, but it did not fall. It peeled, as though skin had fused to skin. As she pulled it free, she screamed, not from pain, but from the sensation of losing something that once was hers. When it came loose, she collapsed. The mask thudded beside her. And so did something else. She looked down at her hands. They were not hers. The fingers were longer, thinner, the knuckles bonier, her skin loose, speckled with dark spots. She crawled to the mirror, ripping down the cloth. The reflection had returned, but it was her, older. No, not her, her mother. Her mother's face on her body. She staggered back, mouth open in a silent scream. Behind her, the mask rested on the ground. It smiled. Its mouth had changed again, no longer weeping. It smiled. The sun never rose that morning. Only a dim grayness leaked through the cracks in the hut. Lien didn't speak. She wrapped the mask in cloth and placed it in the corner. Then she sat at the altar, staring at her hands. They had begun to change back, but slowly. The knuckles remained too sharp, the veins too dark. She touched her face. It felt unfamiliar, soft in the wrong places, tight in others. She reached for her mother's photo, but it was gone again. Only the name remained, Schwen, now carved into the altar, darker than before. She whispered, "Mother, what did you do?" No answer came, only the soft creak of wood behind her. She turned. The mask was gone.
It was Ba Du Yang who came for her. The morning after the 7th night, when Lien had not left her hut, when the village's silence had deepened into fear, he knocked only once and waited. She opened the door without speaking. He looked at her carefully. She looked older than she had a week ago. Her eyes were rimmed in shadow. Her voice, when she used it, sounded like something unpracticed, borrowed. "It's time," he said. She didn't ask where they were going. She already knew. They walked in silence through the woods east of Nam Kai, where the mist never lifted and the birds never sang. The trees grew too close together. Their trunks were twisted, their bark furrowed like sorrow carved into flesh. Every few steps the wind carried whispers, too low to decipher, too present to ignore. Ba Du Yang led her through narrow footpaths she didn't know existed. And then they arrived. A clearing, ringed with standing stones, moss-covered and tall. In the center stood a crooked wooden structure, not quite a shrine, not quite a house. Its beams sagged under age, its roof half-rotted. But what covered its walls stole Lien's breath. Masks. Dozens. Hundreds. Old ones, new ones. Some cracked, some whole. Some smiling, others frozen mid-cry. Some barely resembled faces at all, warped by time, mold, or sorrow that had taken shape beyond human understanding. They hung from nails, from branches, from string. Some were tucked into nooks in the stone, others sat in rows along the dirt. She felt them watching her, and they were. Ba Du Yang said nothing as he stepped into the shrine. She followed. Inside, the air was thick, not with dust, but memory. It smelled of wood rot, incense, oil, and something older, something like grief turned to soil. He knelt before a small altar at the far end, where 7 masks were arranged in a circle. Each was different. Each bore the same crack, from brow to chin, the same as the one she had seen in the mirror. "What is this place?" she whispered. Ba Du Yang did not look at her. "This is where the sorrow stays, for those who broke the ritual, for those who took the mask off too soon,
or wore someone else's grief. She felt a chill crawl up her spine. What happens to them? He gestured toward the walls. They remain. She turned slowly, staring at the rows upon rows of faces, unmoving but not dead. The air inside the shrine pulsed, and in the flickering candlelight, some of the masks seemed to breathe. Their mouths twitched, their eyes shimmered. One tilted its head ever so slightly when she walked past. She backed away. Why did you bring me here? Ba Du-yong finally rose. Because the mask you wear is not yours. She stared at him. I took it from your hands. Yes, but it came looking for you long before that. He walked to a shelf and pulled down a small lacquered box. Inside it, wrapped in silk, was a mask. Her mask. Or something like it. But this one was older, faded, burned around the edges. Still, it bore her face, or rather, her face after the 6th night, hollowed, worn, sad beyond her years. This was carved 17 years ago. She trembled. That's the year I was born. He nodded. Your mother wore it, for someone she lost, someone no one speaks of anymore. She could not breathe. Who? Ba Du-yong looked away. A child, born before you, stillborn. But the sorrow never left her. She buried the mask beneath your grandfather's grave, but the sorrow found its way back. It always does. She whispered, She wore my face before I had one? Yes, and now the sorrow inside the wood remembers you because it knew you before you were born. Her knees buckled. She sat on the floor, surrounded by the faces of the forgotten. They murmured in the candlelight, soft, muffled voices too quiet to understand, but they grew louder the longer she listened. A chant, a single phrase repeated by many mouths. Give it back, give it back, give it back. She clutched her ears. Ba Du-yong touched her shoulder. You must bring it here on the 9th night, the final night, or it will take something from you. What will it take? He looked at her with sadness so deep it carved shadows into the wrinkles of his face. Your name. They returned before dusk. As she stepped back into her home, she swore the walls had shifted again. The altar now held 2 photos, her mother and herself, both framed in black, and between them, the mask. It had returned, untouched, unburned, smiling. Night fell like a breath held too long. The village lights dimmed behind curtains, doors shut with the gentleness of fear. Lien sat alone in her hut, her hands resting on her lap, the mask between them, warm and patient, as if it knew the ritual better than she ever could. Tonight was the 8th night, the penultimate, the night before endings, the night the dead speak. She lit no incense, she needed no invitation. The mask had already entered her dreams, her bones, her blood. It did not require smoke anymore. But she hesitated to put it on. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory like wind through rice stalks. If they call you by name tonight, do not answer. She didn't know if that had been a memory or the mask itself whispering again.
candle at the altar burned low. Shadows trembled on the walls. Outside, the wind carried no sound, not even crickets. The air was too still, as if the world had paused for what came next. Lien stared at the mask. Its expression had shifted again. It now looked expectant, mouth parted, eyes curved in a mournful plea, the face of someone waiting to be answered. She tied the cords, and the world slipped away. This time there was no transition, no drifting, no flickering candlelight. She was simply somewhere else. A corridor of masks. Walls stretched high above her, lined with wooden faces, stacked rows upon rows. They watched her without eyes, each one different, each one familiar in the way dreams feel familiar, without reason. She walked. With every step, a whisper followed, not from behind, but from above. "Lien." She didn't respond. The voice changed. "My child." It was her mother's voice, but softer, hungrier. "It's safe now. Take it off." She stopped. The corridor opened into a vast chamber. At its center stood a woman in white, unmoving. Her back was turned. Her hair, long and black, reached her waist. She stood barefoot in a circle of salt. Around her, 7 masks laid in a ring, all cracked, all open-mouthed. Lien stepped closer. "Are you the one who stayed?" she whispered. The woman nodded. "You wore the mask too long?" The woman nodded again. "What did it take from you?" The woman turned. Her face was Lien's face, but not as she was now. It was her face years from now, aged, erased, emptied. A mask over bone, eyes hollow, lips pale. "I wore sorrow for someone else," the woman said. Her voice echoed like wind through dry leaves. "And now sorrow wears me." "Who were you mourning?" Lien asked. The answer was soft. "My mother, my child, myself." Lien stepped back. The salt circle had vanished. The masks on the floor rose slowly, like leaves stirred by wind that wasn't there. They hovered in the air around her, and then, one by one, they turned to face her. Each mask bore her face, each one slightly different, sadder, older, angrier, emptier. She ran. The corridor closed behind her. The masks followed, their hollow mouths opening, their silent cries chasing her down a path she no longer recognized. She stumbled, fell, and awoke. Her knees ached, her throat burned. She was back in the hut, mask still on. The candle had died. The darkness hummed. She reached to remove the mask, but her fingers paused because the cords had untied themselves, and the mask stayed on. She pulled harder. Nothing. She crawled to the mirror, still cracked, still veiled. She tore down the cloth, and the mirror showed her not one face, but many, layered atop each other, each one worn, grieving. She saw herself, her mother, the woman in the corridor, and behind them all, a child, barely formed, face hidden in shadow. And for the first time, the mirror spoke. "Will you be the next mourner who stays?" The next morning, she returned to Young. She didn't knock. He was already waiting. He sat on the floor, carving nothing, just running his knife over wood that had no shape. "You saw her," he said. She nodded. "Was she real?" Lien asked. Bazyang stared into the wood. Every mourner leaves something behind. Some leave their voice, some leave their face, some leave a question. She sat beside him. "She wore my face because she waited too long to take it off. It wouldn't come off. It never does, unless you leave it where it belongs." "The shrine?" "No." He shook his head. "No. The sorrow doesn't end there. It must be returned to the one who started it." She stared at him. "My mother." That evening, Lien returned to the grave. The sky above was empty, not dark, not light, just gray, like ash that hadn't yet decided whether to rise or fall. She knelt beside the marker, the soil still soft. "You gave me this sorrow. You wore my face before I had one, and now it wants to finish what you began." She placed the mask on the earth. It pulsed once, faintly, then lay still. She bowed her head and waited. Nothing moved. No wind, no voice, no figure in white. Just silence. And a slow release, like a breath she hadn't realized she was holding for 8 nights. She left the mask there. She did not look back. Lien did not return home that night. She walked down the narrow, broken path that curved behind the rice fields, past the withered banyan trees, past the boundary stone carved with names no one said aloud. She didn't know where she was going, only that something was following her. Not in sound, not in footsteps, but in feeling. Grief. It no longer moved behind her like a shadow. It had begun to settle inside. At dawn, she reached the old prayer well, a forgotten place, half swallowed by moss and silence. It was said the villagers once dropped their sorrows into its mouth like coins, hoping the darkness below would keep them. No one visited anymore, but the well remembered. She stood at its edge and stared into it. The wind rose from its mouth like breath, and she thought she heard her mother's voice again. "If you carry sorrow too long, it becomes your name." She didn't sleep, not really. She drifted. And in that place between waking and dream, the memories returned, but they were not hers. She saw her mother, young, hair tied back with crimson string, holding a baby who would never open its eyes. She saw her scream into the fields. She saw Ba Duong handing her a mask, and she saw her mother carve her own name out of her mouth, replacing it with silence. When Lien woke, the mask was in her hands again, though she had left it buried. It was not angry. It was calm, still, waiting. She almost put it on, out of habit, out of pull, but she stopped, because it had changed again. It no longer bore her face. It bore her mother's, younger, afraid, grieving. And for the first time, Lien understood. This mask had never belonged to her. It had only borrowed her. Her breath slowed. She pressed her forehead to the mask, closing her eyes. And again, the dreams returned. She stood in her childhood kitchen. The fire crackled low. Steam rose from a pot on the hearth. Her mother stirred rice, softly humming a lullaby that only came when grief had passed. Her back was to Lien. "You kept it too long," Lien whispered. Her mother's spoon paused. "I didn't mean to. You gave it to me. I didn't know how else to say goodbye." The words hung in the air. Lien stepped closer. "Whose grief was it, Mother?" Her mother turned, and her face was blank. Not in anger, not in horror, just gone. No eyes, no mouth, no sorrow, only skin stretched over silence. "It was mine, but it wore your shape because I could not carry it alone. And now? Now you must choose." Lien awoke to dusk bleeding into the trees. The mask rested beside her, its face once again her own, but softer now, no longer twisted, no longer open-mouthed or tear-stained, just tired. She carried it home. The village had gone quiet. Even the children no longer whispered about the mourning girl. They knew, or perhaps they had always known. She reached her hut, opened the door, and stopped. Inside, on the altar, was a second mask. Not hers, not her mother's, but the child's. Small, unfinished, smooth, no expression. It sat between the two framed photos, her mother's and her own. A third space had opened. She placed her mask beside it, and as she did, she heard something creak behind her. She turned. The mirror, uncovered, whole. Her reflection stared back, and for the first time in days, it was only her. Just Lien, tired, changed, but whole. She stepped forward. Her hand met glass, and the mirror didn't resist. It accepted. She lit incense. One stick. No chance. Just breath. Smoke curled through the room like memory exhaled. No faces in it, no whispers. Only peace. And in the mask's hollow, something pulsed once, faint as a heartbeat, and then stilled. She slept, and her dreams were her own. On the 9th morning, the bell rang, but it did not toll forward, not in the rhythm meant to guide the spirit toward release. It rang backward. 7 chimes, then 6, then 5, like footsteps retraced, like a soul returning. Lien woke with a start, heart pounding in a rhythm that wasn't hers. The air in her hut was thick with a scent she had never known, wet ash and fading incense, like sorrow left out in the rain. She hadn't heard the bell in years, not since the day her father was buried, and never, never in reverse. Outside, the village was quiet, not the usual quiet of early morning, but a stillness too complete, too watchful. Doors were cracked open just enough to see through. Windows were covered not in cloth, but in salt lines drawn across the frames. It was the 9th day of mourning, and everyone knew what that meant. Lien stood at her doorway and listened. Nothing. No birds, no wind, only that hollow hum like silence pressed too tightly. She closed the door and turned to the altar. The mask waited. But tonight, for the first time, it wasn't alone. Beside it was a folded piece of black silk, and inside that silk, wrapped gently, reverently, a mirror shard. She picked it up carefully. The shard was from the mirror in Bao Duong's shrine. She recognized the smooth lacquered back, the polished edge. On its surface, though she hadn't yet looked,
she felt the weight of 1,000 faces pressing outward. When she finally turned it over and looked into it, the reflection was not hers. It was hers, but reversed. Her right eye sat where her left should be. Her parting was wrong. Her birthmark gone. Not a mirror version. An echo. She dropped it. The sound it made when it hit the floor was not glass, but bone. She backed away. The mask tilted forward on the altar, falling silently onto its face, and from somewhere behind her, breathing. Not labored, not hurried, slow, measured, like someone who had returned. She waited until dusk. The 9th night had to be completed. The rules were clear. But she didn't know whose ritual this truly was anymore, hers or the mask's. When the final light faded from the sky, she tied the cords one last time. The mask pressed close. It did not resist. It embraced. The room vanished. She was standing in the cemetery. Graves surrounded her, but none were marked. No names. Just masks. Half buried. Cracked. Stacked on top of one another, like offerings the earth had refused. She turned. The bell tower stood in the center of the field, an old wooden frame long since collapsed in the real world. But here it stood tall. The bell hung from ropes made of black hair, and it rang again, once, then once more, backwards, counting back the nights, from 9 to 8 to 7. Lien stepped toward the tower. Each footfall echoed as if she walked through water. At the base of the bell, someone knelt, a woman wearing white, back turned, hair long and motionless. The same woman from the corridor, the same one from the dreams, the same one who wore Lien's face. But this time, Lien spoke first. "I'm not yours." The woman turned slowly. Her face was made of masks, layered, one over another. Her eyes were many, her mouth many mouths. Some smiled, some cried, some were just blank. "No, but you were chosen." "Why?" "Because you were born after sorrow." "What do you want?" She raised a hand. Inside it, the mask. "Wear it one last time." "What happens if I do?" "You carry us forward." "And if I don't?" The masks on her face began to peel, one by one. Beneath each, another version of Lien, younger, sadder, lost, until the final layer revealed no face at all, just emptiness. "If you don't, you forget us." "Maybe that's peace," she whispered. "No, that's loneliness." Lien took the mask. It pulsed warm in her hands, then cold. She did not put it on. Instead, she placed it at the foot of the bell and spoke. "I grieved, I remembered, but I will not become you." "Then what will you become?" The bell rang again, this time forward, one chime. The ropes frayed, hair unraveled. The bell cracked, and from within it, silence spilled, thick as night, soft as surrender. And behind her, the field of graves began to vanish, one mask at a time, each face fading into fog, until only hers remained, on the altar, back in her hut, waiting. She removed the mask one final time. This time it came off like a breath leaving lungs. No resistance, no scream, just stillness. And when she looked in the mirror, there was no sorrow in her eyes, only recognition of all she had seen, all she had survived, all she would carry, but not wear.
The mask would not burn. Lien had gathered dry straw, pine bark, and cooking oil. She built the fire high in the hearth, fed it until the flames roared orange and wild, until the heat blistered her palms. She placed the mask on the flames gently, like laying a body on a funeral pyre. It did not blacken. It did not smoke. It did not scream. It sat inside the fire like a stone in water, untouched, unmoved. And then it smiled. The wood curled upward at the corners of its mouth, not from heat, from memory. She stepped back, her breath caught in her throat. And in the fire center, within the hollow of the mask's eyes, she saw a reflection, her own face, staring back. But it was not the face she wore now. It was the one from the first night, softer, innocent, unknowing. And it blinked, even though she did not. She doused the fire. Smoke hissed and rose in angry spirals, filling the hut with the smell of wet grief. The mask sat in the ashes, untouched, glowing faintly like embers clinging to sorrow. She did not pick it up. She turned away. But even with her back to it, she felt its gaze resting between her shoulder blades, gentle, persistent, like the weight of a name whispered too often. That night, she did not sleep. She sat by the altar, staring at the mirror. Her reflection was steady now. No distortions, no shadows, just her. But when she blinked, the reflection didn't. When she leaned left, it leaned right, a fraction too slow. And then it smiled. She did not. She wrapped the mirror in cloth, then wrapped the mask in another. She placed both inside the wooden chest beneath her bed where her mother once kept her prayer books and herbs. The lid creaked, the iron latch clicked, but the silence that followed wasn't relief. It was waiting. In the morning, Lien walked to the village square. Children were sweeping leaves. The elders knelt by the well, pouring rice into small bowls. Life had returned, shy but steady. A few glanced at her. Some nodded. One old woman whispered to another and made the sign of the spiral, the ancient motion meant to ward off lingering souls. She said nothing. She smiled, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. At midday, Bao Duong found her sitting beneath the prayer tree. He knelt beside her without a word. She didn't look at him. "It won't burn," she finally said. "No," he replied. "Then what am I supposed to do with it?" "Keep it until it forgets you." "And if it doesn't?" Bao Duong looked at the soil beneath them, his fingers absently tracing the lines between roots. "Then you remember for both of you." That night, she dreamed again. But it wasn't a corridor, not a shrine, not a grave. It was her childhood bedroom, the window open, the moon full. A shadow knelt at the foot of her bed, hunched, quiet. She could not see its face. She reached forward, pulling gently at the shadow's shoulder, and as it turned, she expected to see the mask. Instead, she saw herself. The version that had mourned, the version that had worn the sorrow for 9 nights. "What do you want?" Lien whispered. The other Lien smiled faintly. Nothing. Then why are you here? Because you buried me too. She woke before dawn. Sweat chilled her skin. The chest at the foot of her bed sat still, but the latch was open. And on the floor beside it, the mask, face up, waiting. She did not scream. She picked it up, held it in her lap. She did not wear it. She did not burn it. She simply held it like one holds a photograph too painful to throw away. And as she did, she whispered, "I will not forget you, but I will not become you." And the mask, for the first time, did nothing at all. No smile, no breath, no warmth, just stillness, like wood that had finally become wood again.
The night before the final day was the quietest the village had ever been. Even the river held its breath. Lien sat in her doorway, staring out at the fog-slicked earth, her fingers curled around a cup of cold tea she had long since forgotten to drink. The mask lay on the altar behind her, not hidden, not burned, just there, like a name spoken too often to be denied. And still it had not faded. At sunrise, she returned to Ba Duong. She carried the mask unwrapped, exposed to light for the first time since the ritual began. Its eyes were closed now, not painted, but sealed. Thin wooden lids had grown where once there had been openings, not carved, not glued, simply grown, like the mask had decided it no longer needed to look. Ba Duong sat on the porch of his hut, sharpening a carving blade with slow, rhythmic passes. When she placed the mask in front of him, he did not speak. He touched the wood gently, his thumb grazing the sealed eyes, the faint crack still visible from brow to chin, the mark every mourning mask eventually bore. "It's ready," he said. "For what?" He looked up at her, the blade pausing in his hand. "To be returned, or to be kept." "I don't want to keep it." "Then return it to where this sorrow began." "My mother's grave?" "No, go deeper." He led her beyond the shrine, past the edge of the old forest. There, hidden between two leaning stone pillars, lay a staircase carved into the hillside, nearly swallowed by vines and time. Few know this place, and fewer return. The air grew colder with each step downward. The sunlight thinned, the silence deepened. When they reached the bottom, she found herself standing in a hollow chamber, a root-wrapped room, stone-lined and windowless. At its center stood a tree stump, polished smooth with age. Upon its surface lay 7 masks, ancient, rotting, each with sealed eyes, and one space remained. Ba Duong stood behind her. "This is the root of our mourning, the sorrow that taught the first carver to give grief a face." Lien stepped forward slowly, her heartbeat loud in her ears. She could feel the pressure of the other masks watching, waiting. She knelt, placed her mask in the final space, and the stump breathed, a low exhale of dust. And then, a sound like wood cracking in reverse. The mask shuddered. Its mouth opened. From within it, a voice, soft, tired, familiar. "I was never meant to be yours." "Then why did you give it to me?" Lien whispered. "Because I didn't know where else to put my pain." The voice faded, the mask settled. Its features flattened, the curve of the eyes easing into rest, and for the first time, it looked peaceful. Lien turned to Ba Duong. "Is it over?" He nodded once. "For the mask. And for me?"
He looked at her with eyes as old as the roots in the chamber. "It depends. Have you buried it, or have you learned to carry it?" Outside, the wind had picked up. The leaves whispered like children retelling stories they only half understood. She walked back alone. The world seemed lighter, but something remained. Not heavy, not dark, just quiet. That night she dreamed not of corridors, nor shrines, nor cracked mirrors. She dreamed of her mother, standing in the kitchen stirring a pot of soup. Her face was clear, whole, unmasked. She turned, smiled. "You look tired." "I've been remembering." Her mother nodded. "Then you've done what I couldn't." Lien woke with tears on her cheeks, but they were her own, and they did not burn.
Years passed. The fog never left Nam Kai. It rose each morning with the sun and lingered in the folds of the valley like smoke from a memory too old to name. The villagers stopped wondering why. Some said it was the mountain's breath. Others said it was the forest dreaming. But the old ones knew. It was grief, made gentle. A child walked the forest path alone, her footsteps muffled by moss. Her name was Hua, and she had hair the color of ash and hands too small to carry questions. She was not afraid of the trees or the silence. She had heard stories of a woman who lived beyond the fields near the river's bend, a woman who carved things in the quiet, who wore no mask but carried one in a box made of burnt cedar and red string. Hua found her there, in a hut with no walls, only woven screens and wind chimes made from broken spoons and hollow bone. The woman sat on the floor, her back straight, her hair streaked with silver. She was whittling. Wood shavings curled at her feet like sleeping snakes. She did not look up when the child approached. "You shouldn't be here," the woman said. "Why not?" Hua asked. "This is where sorrow lives." The child stepped closer, eyes wide. "Then I'll whisper." The woman smiled, just barely. "What are you looking for?" Hua shrugged. "A story?" The woman paused, looked up, and from beside her she pulled a small bundle wrapped in black cloth. She placed it before the child like an offering. "You must never wear it," she said. "Why?" "Because it remembers what you haven't lived yet." Hua unwrapped the bundle with careful fingers. Inside was a mask, plain, light, the color of first snow. Its eyes were open, but gently. Its mouth neither smiled nor mourned, just waited. "Whose face is it?" the child asked. "No one's, not anymore." That night, Hua went home and lit a candle. She placed it on the windowsill, facing the trees. The fog pressed against the glass, curious, and in its folds, something moved. Not a ghost, not sorrow, just memory, passing. In the hut by the river, the woman sat alone, her knife still in hand. She carved slowly now, not from pain, not from memory, but from stillness. She had learned the difference. She no longer spoke to the masks. She listened, and they told her nothing, because they too had grown quiet. Outside, the fog crept low across the fields. It did not claw, it did not pull. It simply moved, like breath across a sleeping face. The bell in the square no longer rang. The mirrors in Nam Kai stayed whole. The mourning masks slept in their boxes.
Not buried, not burned, just remembered. And in the stillness of the valley, under sky and fog, a single candle flickered beside a girl's window and did not go out.